The space trade outpost was alive with colors, sounds, and smells from 100 different worlds. Daniel walked slowly through the crowded market street, his eyes moving from one strange stall to another. He had come here as part of his work. As a linguist, studying alien words and lost languages, everywhere around him, merchants shouted in voices that mixed into a constant roar. Small alien children ran between legs, chasing each other while strange animals hissed from cages. It was a normal day, or so he thought, until he heard it. A voice behind him spoke words that froze him in place. It was soft, but clear, and in a language that should not exist anymore. It was the old tongue of the Zelari people, a language Daniel had only seen in ancient records and carved ruins. Slowly, he turned to look. Standing there was a young, alien girl with silver hair that shimmered under the artificial sunlight. Her eyes were wide, her breathing quick, as if she had just seen something impossible. You speak the dead language of our ancestors," she said, her voice trembling around them. The busy market began to slow. Other aliens turned their heads toward them, whispering to one another. Some stared with suspicion. Others with something like fear. Daniel blinked, not sure what to say. He had been speaking softly to himself just moments ago, repeating an old poem his mother once taught him. It was something she used to whisper to him at night when he was a child. He had no idea it was more than a bedtime story. I didn't mean. He began, but the girl stepped closer. Her gaze was intense, almost desperate. "You have to come with me," she said suddenly, her voice low but urgent. Daniel frowned. "Why?" "I don't even know who you are. My name is Kelra, and if you stay here, they will take you," she said, glancing over her shoulder. Daniel followed her eyes and saw a group of tall, alien guards at the far end of the street. Their armor was black, their weapons glowing faintly. And they were pushing through the crowd toward him. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "What do they want with me?" he asked. "They will think you are a danger, or worse, a threat to their power." Kelra replied quickly. "Because you spoke the forbidden tongue?" Daniel almost laughed at the idea. But the look on her face told him this was not a joke. Before he could ask more, Kelra grabbed his wrist. Her hand was cold but strong. "Run," she whispered. And then they were moving fast through the twisting alleys of the market. Daniel stumbled at first, trying to keep up. He heard shouts behind them, the guards ordering people to get out of the way. Kelra led him down a narrow street where stalls were packed with crates of glowing fruit and jars of strange liquids. She weaved through the crowd like she had done this 100 times. They passed under a hanging banner written in symbols Daniel didn't recognize. The air smelled of smoke and oil, and the ground beneath them was slick with some unknown liquid. The sound of the guards' boots grew louder. Kelra turned sharply into a side tunnel, pulling Daniel into the shadows. He could hear his own heart beating fast. They stopped for a moment, hidden between stacked metal crates. Kelra looked at him seriously. "Where did you learn those words?" she demanded. "My mother," Daniel said, still trying to catch his breath. "She used to tell me stories in that language when I was a kid." Kelra's eyes widened even more. "That language is not just stories. It belonged to the royal bloodline of my people. No outsider should know it, unless—" She paused, studying his face as if searching for something. Daniel shook his head. "Look, I think there's some mistake," but Kelra's expression only grew more intense. "There is no mistake. The prophecy speaks of a stranger who will speak the voice of the past and change the fate of the stars," she said. Daniel wanted to laugh it off, but the fear in her voice kept him silent. The sound of boots and shouting came closer. Kelra's grip on his wrist tightened. "This way," she said, pulling him again. They slipped deeper into the maze of tunnels, the dim lights flickering overhead. Daniel realized he had no idea where they were going, but he knew one thing. His life had just changed forever. Tunnel was damp and cold, the walls covered with strange glowing moss. Daniel followed Kelra deeper, the sound of the market fading until only the soft drip of water remained. Her silver hair caught the dim light, guiding him forward like a small beacon. Finally, they stopped in a small chamber lit by a single hanging lantern. Kelra turned to face him, her chest rising and falling with quick breaths. "You need to. Tell me the truth," she said, her voice sharper now. "Where did you really learn those words?" Daniel wiped sweat from his forehead. "I already told you my mother taught me. She said it was an old bedtime story language." Something from her research, Kelra's brows furrowed. "Your mother? Was she a scholar? An explorer?" "She was an archaeologist," Daniel replied. "She traveled a lot when I was young. Sometimes she was gone for months, then one day." She never came back. Kelra paced in the small space, muttering to herself in her own language. Then she looked at him again. Her eyes filled with something between awe and fear. "You don't understand. The words you spoke are not just old. They are sacred. They belong to the high tongue of the Zellerai royal line, a language forbidden to anyone outside the bloodline." Daniel blinked, confused. Why would my mother know it then? "That is what I want to know," Kelra said. "But there's more. The high tongue is tied to a prophecy." Daniel let out a short laugh. "A prophecy?" "Really?" Her expression did not change. "It speaks of a stranger who will come from beyond the stars, speaking the words of the past. This stranger will either bring salvation or destruction to my people." Daniel shook his head. "That sounds like a myth." Kelra stepped closer, her voice lowering. "Maybe it is. Maybe it's real, but the High Guard believe in it. And if they think you are the one, they will not take the risk." He swallowed hard, the reality starting to sink in. "So, what now? Do we just hide forever?" "No," Kelra said. "We move. The outpost is no longer safe. The moment you spoke in that language, eyes and ears across the market reported it. They will search every corridor until they find you." Daniel rubbed his temples. "I didn't even know I was saying anything dangerous." Kelra gave a small, sad smile. "Danger often hides in the things we don't understand." The sound of footsteps echoed faintly through the tunnels. Kelra's head snapped toward the entrance. "They're searching down here." She quickly moved to a hidden panel on the wall and pressed her hand against it. The metal shifted with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow passage that smelled of oil and rust. "This leads to the lower docks," she said. "We can find a ship there." Daniel hesitated. "You're risking a lot for me. Why?" Kelra looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because if you are who I think you are, you might be the only one who can change what's coming. And if I'm not," Daniel asked, "then you will still be a human who spoke the high tongue, and that alone will get you killed." She replied without waiting for his answer. She slipped into the passage. Daniel followed, the narrow walls brushing against his shoulders. They emerged into a darker, noisier part of the outpost. The lower docks were a maze of cargo containers, leaking pipes, and ships of all shapes and sizes. The air smelled of fuel and burning metal. Kelra kept her head low, guiding him between towering crates. Somewhere nearby, a heavy engine rumbled to life. Daniel glanced around and noticed more than one person watching them with calculating eyes. "Stay close," Kelra whispered. They stopped near a small freighter with patched hull plates and flickering lights. The pilot, an older alien with mechanical arms, eyed them suspiciously. Kelra spoke quickly in her language. Gesturing toward Daniel, the pilot frowned but finally nodded. "Get inside," Kelra said. "He'll hide us for a price." Daniel stepped onto the ramp, but before he could enter, a loud shout echoed across the docks. He turned to see a squad of High Guard soldiers pushing through the crowd. Their armor gleamed under the dock lights, weapons drawn. Kelra's face went pale. "They found us," she whispered. The soldiers spread out, blocking every exit. Daniel's pulse quickened. "What do we do now?" he asked. Kelra's eyes darted to the soldiers, then back to him. "Use the language again, say what I tell you, and make them believe it," she said quickly. Daniel stared at her. "And if they don't?" Her voice was calm but cold. "Then we both die here." The soldiers moved with precision, their boots hitting the metal dock floor in perfect rhythm. Daniel felt his breath catch as the nearest one raised a scanning device. The red beam sweeping toward him. Kelra's hand tightened around his wrist. Her eyes locked on his. "Say this," she whispered urgently. Then spoke a short command in the dead language. Daniel hesitated for only a second before repeating the words, his voice trembling but loud enough to carry across the dock. The effect was immediate. The lead soldier froze mid-step, his eyes widening. The red scanning beam flickered and shut off. Other soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, some lowering their weapons slightly. Daniel didn't understand the full meaning of what he'd said, but the weight of it was clear in their reaction. Kelra took advantage of their hesitation, stepping forward just enough to place herself between Daniel and the soldiers. She spoke in her native tongue, her voice sharp and commanding. For a moment, Daniel thought it might work until a second officer stepped forward, his expression harder. He barked something in their language, and the soldiers began closing. And again, Kelra muttered under her breath. Too late, she spun back to Daniel. Her voice urgent. Run. Now, they darted up the freighter's ramp, the pilot shouting in alarm as the engines roared. Before the hatch could close, a blaster bolt hit the wall near Daniel's head, showering sparks. The pilot cursed loudly, slammed a lever forward, and the freighter lurched. But instead of taking off, it slid sideways out of the dock and down a narrow service channel. Daniel stumbled against the wall, grabbing onto a pipe for balance. "What's happening?" he shouted over the noise. "They're locking down the sky lanes. We can't fly out." The pilot yelled back, "We'll lose them in the underdistrict," Kelra added. The freighter jolted as it skimmed over cargo tracks, weaving between moving haulers through a small viewport. Daniel could see the high guard soldiers giving chase on speeders, their lights flashing red and white. The pilot jerked the ship into a sharp turn, nearly throwing them to the floor. Kelra grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him toward a rear hatch. "They'll catch us if we stay on board. We need to disappear into the crowd," she said. Daniel didn't like the idea of leaving the safety of the ship, but the pounding of engines behind them left no choice. The hatch opened to a blast of hot, oily air. Beneath them was a moving conveyor filled with crates and barrels. "Jump," Kelra ordered. Daniel swallowed hard, but obeyed. Landing awkwardly on the conveyor, Kelra landed beside him, her movements quick and silent. They ducked between crates as the conveyor carried them through a massive warehouse. Workers shouted in surprise as they passed, but none dared stop them. The conveyor ended at a sorting platform where hundreds of dock workers and traders moved in chaotic lines. Kelra yanked Daniel into the crowd, weaving between tall aliens carrying sacks of grain. The noise was deafening, clanging machinery, hissing vents, and the constant hum of generators. Daniel glanced over his shoulder and saw the soldiers entering the warehouse, scanning the crowd. "They're still coming," he said. Kelra didn't slow. "Then we go deeper." They slipped through a narrow maintenance corridor that reeked of fuel and rust. Pipes rattled overhead, dripping water onto their heads. The floor vibrated with the thrum of massive engines somewhere below. Kelra led him through twists and turns, clearly knowing the layout better than he did. Still, Daniel could hear faint echoes of armored footsteps behind them. Oh. The corridor opened into a dimly lit chamber filled with old market stalls, long abandoned. Broken signs hung from the ceiling, and dust covered everything. Kelra crouched behind a collapsed table, pulling Daniel down beside her. She placed a finger to her lips, listening, The footsteps grew louder, then paused. A metallic voice barked. An order, and the sound of soldiers splitting into groups echoed through the room. Kelra leaned close to Daniel's ear, speaking so softly he barely heard her. "They won't stop, not until you're in chains or dead." Daniel swallowed hard, his mind racing. What if I just tell them the truth? That I'm nobody special? Kelra's silver eyes fixed on him. "They won't care the moment you spoke those words." Your fate was sealed. A shadow fell across the broken stall. Kelra reacted instantly. Tossing a small metallic sphere toward the doorway, it exploded. With a flash of light and a loud bang, Daniel's vision swam, but Kelra was already on her feet. Pulling him toward another exit, they ran again, their footsteps echoing in the empty chamber. This time, Kelra didn't stop until they reached a wide tunnel that sloped downward into darkness. Daniel slowed, catching his breath. "Where does this lead?" he asked. Kelra's voice was grim. "To someone who can help us leave this station, but he's not the kind of person you want to owe a favor to." Daniel sighed. "Sounds like I don't have much choice." "No," Kelra said quietly. "You don't?" The tunnel grew wider as they moved. The air thick with the smell of oil and old metal. Dim yellow lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the rusted floor. Daniel followed Kelra closely, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. He could still hear faint shouts from far behind, the high guard searching the upper levels. Kelra moved like someone who had been here many times before, her pace quick but careful. They soon reached a heavy sliding door covered with dents and burn marks. Kelra tapped on it 3 times in a strange rhythm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door groaned open to reveal a tall alien with scales the color of midnight. One of his 4 eyes was replaced by a metal implant that glowed faintly. He looked at Kelra first, then at Daniel, his voice deep and rough. "You brought trouble." Kelra didn't deny it. "We need passage off this station." The alien's gaze lingered on Daniel. "And why should I help him?" Before Kelra could answer, heavy boots echoed down the tunnel behind them. The alien's expression darkened. "Ah, I see," he said, stepping aside to let them in. Inside, the room was crowded with crates, weapons, and strange devices. Daniel couldn't name. Kelra turned to him, her voice low. "They will be here any second when they arrive. You must speak in the high tongue again. Say exactly what I tell you, and do not hesitate." Daniel frowned. "What if I say it wrong?" Her silver eyes locked onto his. "Then they will kill us both." Before Daniel could reply, the tunnel door slammed open. A squad of high guard soldiers stormed in, their armor gleaming in the dim light. The lead officer's voice was sharp, barking an order for Kelra and Daniel to surrender. Weapons were raised, the barrels glowing faintly with deadly energy. Kelra stepped closer to Daniel, whispering the phrase into his ear. He took a deep breath and repeated the words loudly, his voice carrying across the room the moment the sound reached the soldiers. Something shifted. The lead officer froze, his expression faltering for the first time. Several of the soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, their stances less aggressive. It was as if the words carried an authority they couldn't ignore. Kelra took a step forward, her tone calm but firm as she addressed them in her own language. The lead officer's eyes flicked from her to Daniel. And then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. The other soldiers followed, though their expressions remained tense. Daniel could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what power the words held, but they clearly mattered to these people. The officer spoke again, his voice quieter now. Kelra replied smoothly, her tone that of someone used to giving orders. After a tense pause, the soldiers stepped aside. Kelra motioned for Daniel to follow her out through the opposite door. They moved quickly, the soldiers not stopping them, though their eyes stayed fixed on Daniel. Once they were far enough away, Daniel finally asked, "What did I just say?" Kelra glanced at him. "You commanded them to stand down in the name of the royal bloodline," Daniel stared at her, "and they believed me." "They had to," she said simply. "Only someone with royal heritage can give that order, at least according to their traditions." Daniel shook his head, struggling to process it. "My mother taught me those words like they were a bedtime song. How could she know?" Kelra's voice softened. "I think your mother may not have been who you thought she was." Her gaze drifted to the necklace hanging around Daniel's neck. "Where did you get that?" she asked. "It was hers," Daniel replied. "She wore it every day." Kelra reached out and gently turned the pendant over in her hand. On the back was a small crest, the same crest carved into the ancient royal archives of her people. Daniel's stomach tightened. "What does it mean?" "It means," Kelra said quietly, "that you may be the heir to a throne that has been empty for centuries." They continued walking through a narrow corridor that led deeper into the station's underbelly. The air here was colder, and the walls were lined with pipes that rattled softly. Kelra spoke without looking at him. "If the High Council learns about you, they will see you as either a savior or a threat. They will either try to crown you or kill you." Daniel swallowed hard. "And what do you think?" Kelra stopped and faced him, her expression unreadable. "I think you're not ready to know the truth yet," she said, then turned away and kept walking. The hum of distant engines grew louder as they approached another hidden dock. Daniel's mind was racing. But one thought kept repeating. The language he thought was nothing more than a bedtime story had just saved his life, and it might change the fate of an entire people. The hidden dock was quiet, a sharp contrast to the noise and chaos of the upper markets. Dim blue lights glowed from the walls, reflecting off the smooth metal floor. A single small transport ship rested on the landing pad, its hull scarred from years of travel. Daniel followed Kelra toward it, his fingers brushing the pendant at his neck, his mother's pendant, the one he'd never taken off since she disappeared. Kelra glanced at it again, her voice low. "You said she taught you the high tongue when you were a child," Daniel nodded. "Yeah, it was just part of my bedtime stories. She would speak in that language and tell me old tales about kings and warriors. I thought she made them up." Kelra's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did she ever say where she learned it?" Daniel hesitated. "Not exactly. She told me she found it during one of her archaeological trips. She worked for different museums, sometimes even private collectors." Kelra stopped walking, her tone sharpening. "Daniel, your mother wasn't just a collector of history, she was part of it." He frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Kelra continued, "that your mother may have been Zalari by blood, maybe even part of the royal family that vanished when the empire fell." Daniel let out a shaky laugh. "That's impossible. She was human." Kelra's gaze didn't waver. "There are records of human-Zalari alliances from centuries ago. Humans who lived among us, fought beside us, even married into our bloodline." The transport ship's ramp lowered with a hiss, and the pilot, a thin alien with pale blue skin and narrow eyes, stepped out. Kelra exchanged a few words with him in her language, her voice quiet. The pilot nodded and disappeared inside. Leaving them alone for a moment, Daniel leaned against a crate, staring at the floor. His mind kept replaying the image from the royal crest on his pendant. It was identical to the carving Kelra had described in the archives. "I don't even know if she's alive," Daniel said finally. Kelra's voice softened. "Do you remember the last time you saw her?" Daniel nodded slowly. "It was on a rainy night. She came into my room, tucked me in, and told me to always keep the pendant safe. She said one day it would open doors I didn't even know existed. Then she kissed my forehead and left for another trip. I waited for her to come back, but she never did." Kelra was silent for a moment, her silver eyes filled with thought. If she truly was part of the royal bloodline, the High Council may have seen her as a threat, she said. Or maybe she was hiding from them, protecting you from what you are. Daniel shook his head. But why wouldn't she tell me? Because knowing too soon would have put you in danger. Kelra replied, the High Guard had been hunting for the heir for generations if they knew a child existed. They would have taken you. A low hum came from the transport ship. As its engines powered up, Kelra stepped closer, her voice firm again. We need to go to the ruins of the capital world. If there's proof of your heritage, it will be there. Daniel looked uneasy. And if we find it? Kelra's answer was calm. Then you will have to choose. Take the throne. Or destroy it forever. Daniel's chest tightened. The idea of being some kind of ruler felt impossible. I'm just a linguist, he said quietly. Kelra tilted her head. You're more than that. Your voice just made trained soldiers stand down. Your blood carries history, and your presence will decide the future. They boarded the transport. The interior, small but clean, Daniel sat by the window. Watching as the hidden dock slowly rotated away, the pilot guided the ship into a narrow launch tunnel. Blue light flashed across Daniel's face as they passed through the energy shield. The stars opened up before them, endless and cold. Kelra stood beside him, pointing out a distant red star on the map display. That's where the capital used to be. Before the fall, the planet is dead now, but the old archives are hidden there. Daniel's stomach turned. And you think? They'll tell us the truth. Kelra's lips pressed into a thin line. The archives never lie, but they do not always give answers we want. The hum of the ship was steady, almost soothing. But Daniel's mind refused to rest. Every memory of his mother now felt like a puzzle piece he had ignored for years. Her stories, her long trips, the way she always avoided talking about her past. And now this, a connection to an alien people, a prophecy, a throne, somewhere far behind them. The High Guard warship still followed. Kelra didn't mention it. But Daniel could feel the weight of it in the back of his mind. The chase wasn't over. It had only just begun. The journey to the dead capital world took hours. The silence inside the small transport broken only by the hum of the engines. Daniel sat by the window, staring at the endless black of space. Dotted with distant stars, Kelra stood near the cockpit, speaking quietly with the pilot, her silver hair catching the dim cabin lights. Finally, the pilot pointed ahead, and Daniel leaned forward to see. The planet loomed into view, a massive sphere of cracked deserts and faded oceans. Its atmosphere shimmered faintly, thin and weak, like the last breath of something long dead as they entered orbit. Daniel could see the scars across its surface. Cities reduced to rubble, great towers broken and leaning. Entire regions covered in ash. Kelra's voice was low. This was once the heart of my people, the place where kings and queens ruled for thousands of years. The transport descended through thin clouds, the ground rising quickly below. They landed in the remains of what had once been a grand plaza. The stone was cracked, the carvings worn smooth by centuries of wind. Daniel stepped down the ramp, the dry air stinging his throat everywhere he looked. The ruins told a story of greatness, followed by sudden destruction. Kelra walked ahead, her boots crunching against the dust. She led him toward a wide staircase that descended into the shadow of a massive structure. This was the royal palace, she said, her voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. The walls were still standing, though broken in places and ancient. Banners hung in tatters from the ceiling. Daniel felt a strange pull as they moved deeper inside. In the center of the throne room, sunlight streamed down through a broken dome. The great throne was still there, a seat carved from black crystal. Its surface cracked, but still gleaming faintly. Around it stood statues of alien rulers, their faces stern and proud. Daniel's eyes caught on one carving in particular. A human-like figure holding a sword, standing among the Zelari kings. He pointed. "Who is that?" Kelra's gaze softened. "That is the first speaker, the human who united our peoples long ago. The one who first spoke the high tongue among the Zelari." Daniel stepped closer, running his fingers over the ancient stone. The figure's face was worn, but there was something hauntingly familiar about it. Kelra motioned for him to follow, leading him behind the throne to a narrow passage. They descended a spiral staircase, the air growing cooler with every step. At the bottom was a sealed metal door covered in strange glowing symbols. Kelra touched one of the symbols, then turned to him. "This is the archive chamber. It will only open for someone of royal blood." Daniel frowned. "And you think that's me?" Kelra's voice was steady. "I know it is." She gestured for him to place his hand against the center symbol. Daniel hesitated, then pressed his palm to the cold metal. The symbols flared with light. The door shuddered, and with a slow groan, it slid open. Inside, the chamber was filled with tall, crystalline pillars, each glowing faintly. Holographic images flickered between them, scenes of coronations, wars, and treaties. Daniel's breath caught when one image sharpened into view. It was his mother, standing in royal armor, a crown-like circlet on her brow. She looked younger, but there was no mistaking her face. Kelra watched him closely. "Now you see, she was one of us. A princess who disappeared before the fall." Daniel's mind spun. So all those trips, all those stories. "She was preparing me." Before Kelra could answer, a sudden alarm echoed through the chamber. The holograms flickered, and a deep voice spoke in the high tongue. Kelra's expression turned grim. "They found us. The High Guard must have tracked the ship here." Bootsteps thundered above, the sound of armored soldiers spreading through the palace. Daniel looked at Kelra, panic rising. "What do we do?" Her eyes locked on his. "We make them believe who you are. They won't listen to me," Daniel said. "They will," Kelra replied, "if you speak to them as their king." The sound of the soldiers grew louder as they neared the chamber. Kelra stepped aside, motioning for him to stand in the center of the glowing symbols. The first soldiers appeared in the doorway, weapons raised. Daniel felt his throat tighten, but he remembered the way the soldiers at the dock had lowered their weapons before. He took a deep breath, the ancient words forming in his mind. The soldiers filled the doorway, their black armor gleaming under the pale blue glow of the archive chamber. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy, barrels fixed on Daniel. Kelra stood slightly to the side, her hand resting on the hilt of a short blade, her silver eyes fixed on him. "Now," she whispered, "speak." Daniel's chest rose and fell as he took a deep breath. The words his mother had whispered to him as a child came back to him like an echo from another lifetime. He spoke them clearly, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. The high tongue rolled off his lips, rich and ancient, carrying a weight he didn't fully understand. The effect was immediate. The lead soldier hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapon. One by one, the others followed, their heads bowing slightly. Whispers passed between them, some glancing at the glowing crest on Daniel's pendant. The lead soldier stepped forward, his voice deep and cautious, speaking in the high tongue. Daniel caught enough of the words to understand. "We await your command, my king." The title struck him like a wave. King, it felt unreal. Yet in this moment, surrounded by the ruins of an ancient empire, it also felt inevitable. Kelra stepped beside him, her voice carrying for all to hear. "You stand before the rightful heir of the royal line. The blood of the first speaker flows in him, the one who will unite our people again." The soldiers straightened, their eyes locked on Daniel. Some looked doubtful, but none dared to challenge openly. Daniel forced himself to stand tall, the weight of every gaze pressing on him. He spoke again, choosing each word carefully. "You will not harm us," he said in the high tongue. "You will leave this place. And you will tell the council that the heir has returned, and you will say that I come not to bow, but to lead." A tense silence followed then. The lead soldier struck his fist to his chest in a gesture of loyalty. The rest followed. The sound of armor echoing in the chamber, without another word, they turned and filed out, their footsteps fading into the ruins above. Daniel let out a slow breath, his shoulders sagging slightly. Kelra's lips curved into the faintest smile. "You did it." He shook his head. "I just repeated what my mother told me years ago. That," Kelra said softly, "is exactly why you are meant to do this." The holograms in the archive chamber shifted, showing the history of the royal line. Scenes of unity between humans and Solari, of battles fought side by side. Daniel saw the first speaker standing before a vast army, his expression calm and resolute. Kelra's voice was almost reverent. "This is your heritage, your responsibility, whether you accept it or not." Daniel looked at her. "What happens if I say no?" Kelra's gaze didn't waver. "Then the High Council will choose a puppet ruler, and the prophecy will turn toward destruction." He turned back to the images, his mind heavy with the weight of choice. The galaxy outside was full of factions and warlords, all fighting for control of dying worlds. And now, somehow, he was standing in the one place that could decide the outcome. The ground shook faintly, a distant rumble passing through the walls. Kelra frowned. "That's not the High Guard. That's something else." The pilot's voice crackled over the cum from the transport ship above. "We've got incoming multiple ships, unidentified." Daniel's instincts screamed that their time was over. Kelra grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the stairs. "We need to leave now." They raced back up through the ruined palace, past the great throne, the sunlight now dimming under the shadow of approaching vessels outside. The plaza was filled with the roar of engines as strange ships descended. Kelra pushed Daniel toward the transport's ramp, her eyes scanning the sky. "This is only the beginning," she said. "Every faction will come for you now, to use you, to destroy you, or to follow you." Daniel paused at the top of the ramp, looking back at the ruins one last time, the broken statues, the silent throne, the cracked banners, all waiting for someone to claim them. He felt the weight of his mother's pendant against his chest. Her voice echoed in his memory, telling him the same words Kelra had. "One day, this will open doors you never knew." Existed. The ramp closed, the transport lifting into the dusty air. Below, the capital world grew smaller, swallowed by clouds and distance. Kelra stood beside him, her voice calm but firm. "You have spoken as a king once. Soon you will have to act as one." Daniel's hands tightened into fists. Whatever was coming, he knew there was no going back. The voice of the past was now his, and the future of two peoples rested in it.